hab keine Angst.
Hey, welcome back, ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and X-Men 97 is not just the best X-Men story I've ever seen on screen. I'm going to explain why it's the best Marvel TV we've seen since WandaVision, and a little later I'm going to talk to Colton Ogburn and Bevan to get their thoughts, but first I want to talk about why this show was way better than all the X-Men movies we'd seen before.
What about Logan?
Fine, but first I want to talk about why this show is way better than the X-Men movies, except for Logan. But I'm also going to talk about why this show resonated with us more than anything else that has happened in the Multiverse saga. It gave us actual character stakes, which is hard to achieve in a multiverse-oriented animated show. But first, let's talk about how this show greatly improved on the X-Men movies. Now, when the first X-Men movie was released, it was a revelation. I cannot even explain to you younger guys what it was like in the year 2000. Finally seeing Marvel characters done right on screen. We only very occasionally got to see a loyal adaptation of a superhero movie. And now, here was Wolverine, cage fighting. Sure, the effects were low budget, but it had Patrick Stewart as Professor X. It legitimized geek culture.
Now it's our time! Our time!
I mean, compared to the straight-to-video and TV movies that we'd seen in the past 2 decades, this was like Hollywood royalty. But when you re-watch that X-Men series, it's obvious how much the director and the studio were always trying to run away from the source material. Bryan Singer wanted to create a grounded action metaphor for queer teens.
Have you tried not being a mutant?
He didn't want to make a superhero movie.
You actually go outside in these things? What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
That line irritated me so much in the theater, and it still irritates me today. That was a way for the normies to say, haha, you nerds like comics where people wear bright yellow jumpsuits. And look, black leather costumes were just as of their time because they were trying to replicate the look of the Matrix. Singer also banned X-Men comics from the set, and Kevin Feige, as a lowly associate producer, became the go-to guy on set for questions about the comics. He even had to encourage the makeup artist to make Wolverine's hair bigger and bigger like it is in the books. And then you can really tell when the studio started to take over the films. Every movie had to have Wolverine as the lead. Every movie had to feature Magneto. And then Fox president Tom Rothman ordered X3 to be the last film because team movies were expensive and he saw more upside in solo spin-offs. Hell, even the way X3 killed off Cyclops to focus on Halle Berry, who had just won an Academy Award, like all that kind of stuff just took you out of the moment. It made you feel like these were products being made by a studio instead of stories being told by people. The studio never knew what to do with these characters, and it showed. They ruined Deadpool and X-Men Origins, and the only reason a comic-accurate Deadpool movie was even released is because someone leaked the test footage.
Yeah, I wish we know who.
I wish we know who. And the prequel series started off with Matthew Vaughn's First Class, but even then, he wanted to make a trilogy that ended with Days of Future Past, but the studio interfered, and they rushed to get the nostalgia bait film with Patrick Stewart in it so they could make more money faster. And afterwards, the franchise had nowhere to go.
Oh, there, just a second, person. Oh no, the IRS needs my social security number because my account has been compromised.
Doug, hang up.
But the IRS, they say I can win Taylor Swift tickets.
Dude, the IRS does not call you or give away Taylor Swift tickets. It's a scam.
Oh, well how did they get my number then?
Dude, that's the messed up part that nobody wants you to know. They got your number and email from online data brokers. The internet is filled with shady people who pay big money just for access to your private data. And I know this because I used to get a ton of spam phone calls and emails.
Oh, but you don't get those calls anymore?
Very rarely, because I signed up for Incogni. They're the sponsor of this video. Incogni is by far one of the best products we talk about on this channel. This is the app that they don't want you to know about. You would be shocked how much of your personal information is just out there on the internet, like your address and phone number. And shady companies can get this info so easy that it's scary. Like, you may have noticed, you sign up for a loyalty card or a newsletter and suddenly you get bombarded with targeted ads or robocalls. That's because these companies are selling your data to giant firms called data brokers, and then they sell your information to other advertisers. Incogni found more than 100 data brokers that were selling my sensitive information. And I'm talking about financial details, health history, internet search history,
your bank records, medical histories, voting patterns, emails, phone calls, your damn SAT scores.
And they were selling this information to the highest bidder. Several of them were rated 10 out of 10 for data sensitivity, and they were selling information about my potential health risks, my insurance provider, even my credit type. Very scary stuff. But here's the thing, guys. These data brokers have to remove your name from their database if you ask them to.
Oh, I don't got time to contact over 100 companies. I gotta manage the store.
But that is where Incogni comes in. They contact those companies for you. You don't have to do anything, and they alert you when the request has been completed. After signing up, I get almost no spam, and I can't even remember the last time I got a phone call from my old friend, unknown number. So I highly recommend giving Incogni a try. Use my code ScreenCrush with the link below to get an exclusive deal, 60% off an Incogni plan. It's a great deal that you don't want to miss. Now, back to what I was saying. I mean, look guys, the Fox X franchise had its high points, like Logan and Deadpool, but that happened when they just gave the filmmakers room to work. But the Fox X universe was never created with a plan in mind. I mean, they made the same movie twice, for God's sake. And along the way, they never bothered to develop any of the characters except Charles, Logan, Magneto, and eventually kind of Mystique. But X-Men 97 far eclipsed the movies as a whole because they focused on the entire team. Like, in the movies, Scott and Jean basically exist to flesh out Wolverine's character. They create a love triangle that makes Wolverine sad. But in the show, the love story belongs to Scott and Jean. We see Scott's inner conflict, Jean's identity crisis, and Wolverine is on the outside looking in.
You're Jean Grey, he's Scott Summers. Those are the rules.
And that is where he belongs. He's not Rick. He's Daryl. Wolverine is cool because he is underused. He's not even in the finale, and frankly, he's only got to be truly badass once in this show.
The brave always die first.
But that moment meant something because we had to wait for it. And the movies have also given us a lot of emphasis on Magneto because they never broke out of talking about this ideological battle between Charles and Eric. Now that battle is important to the X-Men story, but it's not the only X-Men story. It's not the only thing worth telling. Like, why was Magneto in Dark Phoenix or in Apocalypse? Like in the comics, he would disappear for years so then his return would have an impact. But X-Men 97 used Magneto correctly. I mean, for my money, this show needed to be longer so we saw more of his story as he leads the team, but what we did get was perfect. Now we have seen a lot of scenes in the movies where Magneto makes a big grand show of power to show humanity the strength of mutant kind. I am bored with that scene. It is getting old. But then in this show, we saw the best version of that scene ever put to screen. When Magneto gives his defense at the UN, he's not trying to cow humanity or to make them afraid. He is showing them that they have every reason to be afraid of their own actions. He is showing them the mutants have decided to pursue peace, and he gives them a warning.
Do not make me let you down.
And then we see this kind of thing all through the series. The show continuously brings back story beats that we saw in the movies and the comics and then combines them and reinvents them in new, fun ways. Except for the Phoenix reveal in episode 10. I hated that. And by the way, everybody, I do want to thank you for clicking this video and supporting our channel and for shopping our merch store where we have lots of X-Men parody merch for sale right now. You can find links below. But anyways, except for Deus Ex Phoenix, the show is a flawless execution of people who love the source material. It shows us what happens when business people step aside and give the creatives the ingredients to cook. And later, I'm going to talk about how this is a roadmap for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So I think there's a lot of lessons that Marvel Studios can learn from the quality of X-Men 97, but I don't just take it from me. I want to hear from our guests. We have Colton Ogburn, the guy who's trapped in our television but doesn't know it, so please don't tell him. And of course, Bevan, the host of Beverages with Bev, which you can watch right now on Tubi. So Bevan, I haven't really had a chance to talk to you since the show has ended. Do you want to talk about your thoughts on the finale and the series as a whole?
Yeah, for the most part, I think it's a solid A-. I thought that the cliffhangers were really lovely, and the breadcrumbs that they were sprinkling throughout the entire season, especially in the intro, was always like a fun little game to play every single week. I really appreciate them bringing value back to watch the full intro, please. Don't skip that, as most television shows, right? That was a lot of fun.
TV shows, they don't do it anymore. They don't have opening credits. It's really sad.
No theme songs or anything like that. I miss those from the 90s.
And the 2000s. Community gave us a great theme song. But
sure.
yeah, I think starting around 30 Rock had a great theme.
My wife and I were watching 97, and they went to skip the intro, and I was like, no, we do not skip the intro of X-Men 97.
No.
Yeah.
In this house, we do not skip the intro. Even
just for the theme itself. That's a good running theme, on the treadmill. It's such a good theme. So, sorry, Bevan, I cut you off, though. So you're talking about it's an A- for you, and you loved they brought back the intro. Where else about the finale and how it landed for you? It's like a true X-Men fan who reads the comics and knows the original series well.
I really enjoyed the themes. They really stuck the landing with the theme about found family and father figures and parental figures in general. I love that Cyclops made that decision when they're doing the big boss battle that we've come to expect with Marvel properties or just superhero properties in general. He stops the fight and he says, actually, team, let's just try and talk to him like he's one of us and we're trying to help him. And I thought that was a great like little twist that I didn't see coming. I thought we were going to get the big boss fight and he was going to be, killed either that way or he was going to escape and then death was going to kill him later, which that did not come to pass, but it's okay. We're still going to get death. So I thought that was great. My only complaint was my favorite character, Phoenix, was really just came and went so quickly.
Deus Ex Phoenix, right? I talked about that on our video yesterday. I really didn't like that. That was probably the number one thing I did not like about this ending, that they brought her in, she did the thing, and then Jean's like, oh, she's gone. So yeah, not my favorite thing. But like I was saying earlier, though, there's a lot that this series did. Like when you compare it to the X-Men that we've gotten in the past, right? And I'm not, completely dogging the Fox movies. Obviously, there's some incredible high points to those. You can consider Logan an X-Men film, and it's obviously like one of the greatest superhero films ever made. But Colton, where did this series and this finale land for you? Especially in relation to the other X-Men media we've had in the past.
I was not one of these people who thought that this show was like the second coming, like at first. I enjoyed it. I thought it was good. But it wasn't until like these last 3 episodes that I was really like hooked. Like I was really impressed with what they were doing. But yeah, it was a solid show overall. I would say probably the only episode that felt maybe a little filler was the Mojo episode. But even that episode was important, in terms of like character development and stuff with Jubilee. So I really enjoyed it. And I think that it is probably the best on-screen X-Men adaptation that we've ever gotten. And that's coming from a guy who, I'm a big Fox era X-Men fanboy. I love me some Hugh Jackman Wolverine and Magneto. Ryan, you talk a lot about how they really relied heavily on those 2 characters. Those are probably my 2 favorite X-Men characters. So I really do love that era of X-Men, but I have to admit that X-Men 97 is probably the best X-Men we've ever gotten on screen. It had the nostalgia that the Multiverse Saga seems to be really interested in laying on thick, but they laid it on in a way that worked. Like it didn't feel forced in any way. I think it being a cartoon probably allowed them to get away with some things that maybe we'd roll our eyes at, like if they did it in live action. So I think that benefited the show overall. And I think this show proved a point I've made, and I'm sure you guys have said as well, that X-Men is best served as a TV series. I love X-Men movies, but I really think that X-Men stories are best served in a episodic type fashion.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because if you look at the X-Men movies, I talked earlier about how you can tell the executives decided, oh no, we have to put all the emphasis on Wolverine. They were developing a Magneto solo film at one point that morphed into First Class, and they really just said, okay, so anybody who isn't that marquee character, we don't really want to develop them in the films. But you look at great ensemble series like Star Trek, Next Generation, not the original series, and they're great at developing the entire cast. So in that way, I agree with you. But one thing, Matt talked about in our talk back the other day was having animation budget works out so much better for X-Men on TV. I think live action, it would be a lot harder to pull off because you'd want to see epic scale things. And as we've seen, Marvel Studios television doesn't always handle epic scale well, even when they have the money, like with Secret Invasion.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think animation forces people to get as specific as possible because you have to lock things in before you go and animate something, as Jeffrey Katzenberg figured out when he joined Disney. It's hard to edit animation, so working through the kinks of things, it's a longer process, so the scripts have to be locked in and they have to be tight before you commit to putting it to ink.
Yeah, and this is what brings us to the MCU. So, Jon Favreau, indie filmmaker, hired for Iron Man. They start shooting without a script. The studio is just forming, like it's I think it was still like above a car lot at that point. Their headquarters were. So they were throwing everything together, figuring out what worked, and then Marvel learned the wrong lesson from that, which is they went into a lot of projects with their action sequences, their previs done, but they didn't really have the story shaped around that. I mean, that's how John Woo makes a movie, but that's John Woo. And I think it worked for them for years because they had certain beats established, but then it really caught up to them in the Multiverse Saga, where all of these they're putting out so many projects at the same time that they lost focus, they lost attention. We've talked about this at length on the channel. But Bevan, I think you're 100% right. The fact that they said, no, we have to write this first. We have to focus on the writer's room. And that's something else. This is, I believe, one of the few Marvel shows that had a traditional writer's room, that had a showrunner. You know, there's been a lot of news in the past 6 months where Marvel was doing this thing where they had they were making their shows like movies and cutting them up into episodes, and now they're transitioning with Daredevil Born Again to live action shows having a traditional showrunner. Thank goodness. Do you think, Bevan, that's part of also what we saw here, like traditional TV structure won out?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you could see it in the writing and how the characters have arcs within each of the individual episodes where, you know, each episode was focusing, because it's an ensemble cast and because it's a television show, you can dedicate an individual episode to a character's growth. That's why you get like the episode in episode 3 with Madeline Pryor and the Goblin Queen, and then you get Scott kind of having this theme throughout about like him being the father figure of the X-Men, him being a father figure in general to Nathan. And then you get like the Jubilee episode with Mojo was also important for her growth as well. And that's always so lovely when you can kind of dedicate individual episodes to a character's growth while also painting the big picture.
Yeah, and I talked about this a couple of days ago, but I really wanted to see more, you can say filler episodes, but I would just call them character episodes, more solo journeys. But, there's budget limitations, there's, streaming limitations. I get that, so I'm not going to keep harping on that point. But one thing I really want to talk about, Colton, you just mentioned that the Multiverse Saga seems like steeped in nostalgia. Which makes sense. We've talked at length about how we'll see Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man and Hugh Jackman's Wolverine. With the Infinity Saga, it seemed to have a common theme of coming together. The gems are coming together, the heroes are coming together, and the Multiverse Saga has been harder to pin down on what does this mean, because we don't have the protagonist, we don't have the Tony Stark. This season of this show, I think, Bevan, you said it perfectly, is about how the X-Men are a found family, right? So that's another thing, too, where I look at the rest of the Multiverse Saga, I don't see, unless it's grief, I mean, that would be the theme of Phase 4, but boy, that's a depressing theme for a blockbuster superhero franchise to spread across so many hours of programming. Yeah. So, Colton, when you look at this, how do you think that X-Men 97 executed just like better than the MCU? How did it execute a theme and a meaning behind everything that the MCU maybe hasn't had?
Well, I mean, look, I am a huge proponent of interconnected stuff. I love the MCU. A lot of people say they need to do things that aren't connected. They say people are over, interconnected cinematic universe type storytelling. I'm not that guy. I like interconnected type stuff. Having said that, what X-Men 97 had going for it compared to like She-Hulk or Moon Knight or like other shows that have been on Disney Plus, I think with those shows, even if they try to do their own thing and be their own thing and have this, distance from the interconnected universe, we as the audience have been, trained to expect a connection from the Infinity Saga. So that lack of connection that we're getting with the Multiverse Saga stands out as I think an issue. And I mean, add on top of the fact that some of the shows just haven't been that great. I think what X-Men 97 had going for it is that connectivity was not expected. I mean, I kind of expected it with all my theories and stuff, but I think
you have thrown out a lot of, hey, this is going to be in the Avengers versus X-Men, it's the same universe theories.
Yeah, and I'm right, but
that's okay. Go ahead.
But with X-Men 97, I think that we as the audience, maybe without even realizing it, we went in with maybe, I hate to say a low bar, but perhaps a little bit of a low bar. We weren't expecting these major connections. We weren't expecting really deep storytelling, maybe, especially if you hadn't seen the animated series in a while and maybe just kind of had a memory of it. Oh yeah, that was that Saturday morning cartoon. It's actually a pretty deep show, and X-Men 97 continued that. Kind of bouncing off your point about, Wolverine not being the main character, I think what this series was able to do was it allowed Wolverine to be who Wolverine is, which is not the leader, not the main character. It let him be that traditional Wolverine like from the comics, and that also allowed Scott to be a Scott Summers we haven't really seen on screen since the animated series, which was this leader type Cyclops character. And I'm hoping that even if this series doesn't tie into the greater MCU, I'm hoping this is a blueprint to kind of get audiences ready for a very similar type of X-Men going into the MCU.
And Bevan, I'm going to bring that over to you then, because we've talked a lot about like, oh, what's their plan? What's their plan? It's not Kang Dynasty anymore. What do you think this show means, or does it even affect Marvel's plans for live action X-Men?
It's a great question. If anything, I feel like they're trying to, I'm more curious about how they're going to bring X-Men into the MCU when the MCU already accepts superheroes and there's not a lot of discrimination against superheroes, and the X-Men, like one of their core, battles that they have is trying to just be accepted in society. And I'm excited that the X-Men 97 kind of painted away how that could work by bringing in the cameos of like Iron Man and Captain America and how they are treated differently than the X-Men. And that is something that I had not seen in a long time. So I was like, oh, this could be something that the MCU could take from X-Men 97, is how to paint how the X-Men are, even though they are superheroes like Captain America, like, Black Panther, like Iron Man, there's still a discrimination factor against it. So I would say that's something that I'd be intrigued to see the MCU kind of take from X-Men 97.
Let me ask you a follow-up then. When it comes to the actual production of the movie itself, because they're apparently, they haven't announced it yet, but their rumor is hiring a writer for X-Men. Do you think that we'll see an X-Men universe that is, do you think that we'll see an X-Men movie that draws from similar storylines, or do you even think that this new movie is going to take place in the MCU?
My first instinct is if I had the keys to the car of the MCU, I would not put the X-Men in the MCU. I would put it in a multiverse kind of separate Earth in itself first, to get us to like the characters and not be bogged down by the politics of the MCU. And then I would figure out a way to bring them in of some sort, whether that's through Apocalypse or time travel or anything like that. I just really want
what they're doing with the
Apocalypse.
Fantastic Four as well.
Yeah.
But we also had that tease at the end of the Marvels, which I know Colton sparked 1,000 theories for you, which Kevin Smith talked about on his podcast. Yeah. So Colton, what are your thoughts on this incorporation of the X-Men into the 616?
Well, I think they showed us in 97 with how Cap refused, to go in and help. He told Rogue, we've got to play this one by the book. It showed this distinction between superheroes and then specifically mutants. And I think what they're also setting up in the MCU with the new Captain America movie is I think society is willing to accept superheroes in a structured type fashion, like with like what Ross is wanting to do with like controlling superheroes and stuff like that. I think that they are going to portray rogue type superhero, no pun intended, superheroes who are not under any type of thumb and aren't being, monitored and controlled. I think that is all laying the groundwork for a scenario where people with enhanced abilities within the MCU are going to be, we're going to see these arguments for them needing to be restricted and people being scared of them and stuff like that. And I think that's something X-Men 97 has started to set up with Captain America's refusal to step in and help the mutants. And I think we also can expect to see humans and society being fully and willing to turn against classic heroes like Captain America if they start standing with the mutants or something like that, or refuse to go along with like a Thunderbolt Ross, or perhaps like in Daredevil, we're going to see Mayor Kingpin, Mayor Wilson Fisk with his, banning like vigilantes and stuff like that. So to Bevan's point, I think that we are getting to a point in the MCU where superheroes and people with enhanced abilities are going to be disliked like the mutants are in the comics. So I think they're already laying that groundwork for mutants to come in and get that, shunning that we're used to seeing.
Well, the only part of that I think that you might be off on is I don't think that we'll see another instance where it's like a mass of people dislike superheroes, especially when the mutants are introduced, because I think what will happen is they will look at superheroes like Captain America, Ant-Man, and say, those are the good ones. We like those guys, but the mutants are weird. Like, the mutants look different. They don't look like movie stars. They're off to themselves. People say they're terrorists. Like, I think that actually having the heroes will allow for more prejudice against mutants, because if the X-Men are the only heroes in the world and they're stopping supervillains, it would make sense that you'd be like, oh my God, thank goodness these good mutants are there. You know what I mean? Especially since some of your kids may be mutants. But, you know, the real horror for humans in this world is that their kids could be a mutant one day, you know, that they're lurking within us. So there's a certain paranoia there that I don't think extends to most superheroes. But I want to pivot back to the Multiverse Saga real quick, because this is something, like with Fantastic Four, they made the smart decision, I think, to not try to introduce them into the MCU framework. They're saying, let's just put them in a different dimension, and then, like we keep saying on the channel, they're probably going to combine everything, all the universes in Secret Wars. I think they'll do that with X-Men. I would be very surprised if the tease we got at the end of the Marvels doesn't set up this next X-Men movie. Bevan, what do you think? Is that what that tease was about?
I honestly think that would be the right call, is to do that. And if that's what they're teasing, that's great, because I think Marvel has finally gotten the memo that it's too much for a lot of people. And again, they need normies to go and see these movies as well. And if you make it too interconnected, and Colton and I talked about this in the last roundtable, if you make it feel too much like homework, then that might be a turnoff now, as opposed to back then where people like the three of us would go and see something because we've watched everything. Not everyone has the time to do that or watch the Disney Plus shows. So if they did an isolated X-Men movie first to get people to like the characters, then they're going to keep coming back for those characters when you connect them to the other movies they may have not seen, like the Marvels, because not a lot of people saw the Marvels.
I think, and correct me if this is, if there have been any reporting on this, the X-Men movie, that's going to come out after Secret Wars, right? Are we all, in agreement on that? This wouldn't be a Phase 6 movie. They haven't announced, I don't know.
There's still Phase 6 movies they haven't announced yet, so I'm not sure.
I really do think that they're going to use X-Men 97, and I'm not saying like the literal characters go over into that universe necessarily, but I think they are going to use the idea of those X-Men, the X-Men from the Fox era X-Men, and they're going to give us, like you guys said, this variant universe with familiar X-Men that, just we as a general audience are familiar with. But I don't think we're going to see a movie with those X-Men. They're just going to appear in other movies, and they are going to be a universe that is, allows for the X-Men to participate in Avengers Secret Wars. And then in Secret Wars, I think we're going to see an in-canon reboot that creates a new universe from scratch where mutants have always existed, and the Avengers and Spider-Man and everybody has always existed in this universe, and that allows that takes away the problem of, oh, where have the mutants been and why are they treated different? We're starting from scratch there in an in-universe type way. So I think that's what they're going to do, and that the new X-Men movie will take place in that new universe in this new MCU.
Yeah, Colton, I think you're 100% right. And I think that, I'll talk about this in a little bit, but I think that they're doing the right thing by paying homage to all these past characters. But I am really looking forward to an X-Men movie where the X-Men get to be superheroes. We haven't really seen that, because all of the movies they've mostly leaned into this, they hate and fear us aspect of it. But, Bevan, that's not just who the X-Men are. They go to space. They save the universe. Mike Lawrence talked about how in episode 2, Magneto saves a kid from a Ferris wheel falling on him. I'd like to see more of that, but do you think, Bevan, that too much of these characters, as soon as they got placed in popular culture, like in the movies, that executives maybe said, well, they're one thing. Like, Spider-Man is this one thing. Spider-Man can't, go to space in his movie, even though he does in the comics. Do you think that the MCU is going to, look beyond nostalgia and show us something new or take these characters in a different direction?
I hope so. The tricky thing is that Disney and Marvel have been banking so much on nostalgia for so long that until they start losing money. I don't see them course correcting too much, and I think that is finally
they're
happening
there.
because they
Yeah,
did
exactly.
We just wrote about this, about why Disney lost so much money. But I also think,
you wrote a great video for us about that, actually, about how Disney basically has created a nostalgia loop that's running dry, and I think you're 100% right about that.
It is, because you got to create new nostalgia. You have to create something that people can talk about 30 years from now, and it's not like the Gollum movie, which we kind of see. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm curious about it because I love me some Andy Serkis, but like, I don't know if we need a Gollum movie for nostalgia. What is the Gollum movie for? What is it saying that's new?
And that is exactly what I want to talk to you guys about right now, as far as what I think this show is going to teach the MCU going forward. Colton Ogburn, you can find him on the channel. Bevan, you can find her, like I said, on Bevs with Bevan, on Tubi. The link for all of that is below. Thanks, guys. Now, what I admire most about this show is that it was built on a foundation of nostalgia, but then it made a point to move on from nostalgia.
What do you mean?
Well, like Bevan and Colton and I were just saying, Disney is stuck in a loop of nostalgia exploitation. They make Star Wars shows and movies that specifically appeal to the love of the original trilogy. They make sequels and live-action remakes to their beloved classics. They even forced Pixar to start pumping out sequels. And the MCU has already been caught in a nostalgia cycle, even though technically the franchise isn't even old enough to vote.
How old is he?
I'm 11 months.
For me, it goes back to, why the Multiverse Saga? Why tell a sprawling, complex story that involves confusing alternate timelines and universes? I think Marvel chose the Multiverse Saga because Disney had just bought Fox and they wanted to find a way to introduce some elements of the Fox X-Men movies into the MCU. But also, the industry of nostalgia, remember, works in 20-year cycles. People get older, they have kids, and they want their kids to watch the same things that they watched when they were kids. X-Men was released in 2000, more than 20 years ago. The Tobey Maguire movies are also 20 years old. And a Multiverse Saga would give the studio a way to return some of these actors. I think Marvel took this lesson from the movie Days of Future Past. Get the old and new actors to share the same screen at the same time and make a bunch of money. The problem is, that is not a story saga, that is an IP saga. It's not sustainable to just give us crowd-pleasing cameos, and that is why X-Men 97 was so brilliant. Episode 4, Motendo delicately addressed this idea. Jubilee is pulled into a video game world where she gets to relive the greatest hits of the original animated series.
I was trapped here with Storm. Gambit, too. And a bunch of other mutants.
In the original show, Jubilee was our audience proxy. We are introduced to the X-Men through her eyes.
Did you see what she did?
Yes, Rogue has a way with men.
So in this episode, we are Jubilee, playing vintage X-Men arcade games and reliving our memories of the original series. But then Jubilee meets her older self, just like how all of us who grew up watching the show are also now adults. And in watching the show, we're basically in conversation with our memories of the original show. And then she gives her younger self some advice on nostalgia.
Nice knowing how every stage ends. No surprises, no twists. It always stays the same. But that's not living.
And then, the very next episode is one of the greatest installments of the MCU. Remember it. It's like Bo DeMaio and his team were gently holding us by the hand before changing this world forever. And I think this is what the MCU's nostalgia cycle can learn from this show. Yes, they need to have scripts before shooting, like we said. Yes, they need to trust creatives. But more importantly, let's see a return to character stakes. Phase 4 of the MCU is all about looking backward, people grieving the victims of the snap or T'Challa's death. And then we also had a healthy dose of nostalgia.
Our final member, Professor Charles Xavier.
But think about Spider-Man No Way Home. I mean, there is obviously a lot of nostalgia in that film.
How are you? Trying to do better.
But the two Peters show up to support the emotional journey of Tom Holland's Peter #1. After his aunt dies, they are the people who know what he is going through.
She told me that with great power comes great responsibility.
Like, guys, you want to know why fans didn't respond to Kang? It's cause he was beaten by ants. Had Ant-Man died fighting Kang, this would have sent a signal that anyone could die, even Paul Rudd. I mean, Joss Whedon ended Phase 2 by killing an Avenger. The entire saga ended by killing Avengers. I'm not saying that we have to have a lot of character deaths like Gambit's to give this saga stakes, but we do need to feel as if these characters are at risk in some way. In the Multiverse Saga, the friendship between the Avengers was broken. This created stakes. The Multiverse Saga has been great for cameos and produced some amazing character moments like in WandaVision and Loki.
I love you. I love you in every universe. years.
But overall, nothing in this saga has made me feel the kind of empathy, sorrow, and triumph that I got from that single hour of an animated show. Well guys, that's just my thoughts on X-Men 97 versus the MCU, but what do you think about the two comparison-wise? What do you think the MCU wants to do going forward? What would you like to see them do? Tell me in the comments or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, welcome to the channel. Please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.